last 30 years, when we started off my company, which is now branded as Cyient, we provided engineering as a service to global customers and built this brand called Engineered in India.
Somebody once told me that success in life comes down to the number of difficult conversations one is willing to have. You know, you have such a calm demeanor and you look like, touch wood, a very happy person. Hope that's always the case. How and when have you had difficult conversations that just couldn't be avoided?
We started realizing that, look, if you want to get into very serious engineering as a service, the other big block is a domain expertise. Domain becomes very important. You can't do training with domain. It's sheer experience.
B.V.R Mohan Reddy, it is such a pleasure to have you with us on Network Capital. We've long admired your career and your breadth of work, and now you've come out with a new book, Engineered in India. Tell us a bit about the origins of this book and how you started thinking about it.
Well, Utkarsh, if you look back and look at my career, which spans almost 40 plus years now, I was to start with a professional working in the corporate world, but I would always describe myself to be an entrepreneur. Then I had a semi-entrepreneurship stint of 10 years running a computer hardware system integration company, and then became an entrepreneur for 30 years. So around 25 years, when I was also turning 60 plus, I decided that it was time for me to think about a succession plan. And I found a successor. When I found the successor, the next question that came to my mind was, you don't retire from life. You retire only from a role. I was giving up this role of being the CEO of the company. And as a result, I said, what's your passion in life at this juncture? And the passion was more on education, innovation, entrepreneurship. And I was working in that area for the last 6 to 8 years. We can talk more about it as we move along. But during that period, almost the last 5-6 years back, 5-6 years into this new passion of my life, I said, how do I communicate with more people? And we thought the right way of doing it was to write the book with all the experiences that I had with me. And that's how this book got initiated.
And what about the title? Why did you call it Engineered in India?
So in some ways, Utkarsh, if you look at it, many of us who live in this part of the world are engineered in India. But the big passion in life is I am by training a mechanical engineer. And I spent all my life, all my professional life in doing more amount of engineering, of course, using computers. And in the last 30 years, when we started off my company, which is now branded as Cyient, we provided engineering as a service to global customers and built this brand called Engineered in India. So therefore, I thought I'll call my book too as Engineered in India.
And what did you engineer from India was truly a company that was among the first who started building solutions off of India and for the world. What were the early days like? What was the starting hypothesis of the company?
The starting hypothesis way back in 1991 was that we provide engineering as a service to the global companies. We saw already some amount of success going on with IT services. And the key advantage with services from India, which involves human capital, is primarily the cost advantage, the cost arbitrage that it provides. So we thought engineering would also provide the same arbitrage. So let's look at engineering as an outsourcing service for the global companies. We did not realize at that point of time that we were a little too early in terms of foraying into this marketplace. because still India did not have the right recognition. In the lighter vein, I would say even the early 90s, people used to think that, there were elephants roaming around the streets of India. There were snake charmers all around. And so therefore, understandably, there's one other major issue involved is that when it comes to engineering, there's also intellectual property that's involved for an organization. So therefore, you're trying to trust somebody thousands of miles away with your intellectual property, giving some of the technical information to them. So therefore, it was fairly rough for us in the initial years, but we were very fortunate, like any other entrepreneur. I was nimble-footed. I looked for adjacencies. We found an adjacency which was a low-hanging fruit, and that was to do with digitization. It was in some ways, it was to do with computer-aided digitization, but it was a low-end service, but had good margin service it was. And it was a total addressable market was very large.
Right.
We found that particular marketplace. We built scale with digitization as services from the company. But we got a major breakthrough in 2000 for engineering services, and we scaled that business. Digitization still is a part of the company, but it's a very small part of the company. It actually sits in each of the verticals that we have, industry verticals that we have.
It's fantastic, especially the timing that you mentioned around 1991. So you had seen the pre-liberalization in India, and of course, you're one of the main architects of shaping the IT revolution post 91. I want to tell you that a few weeks back, we hosted Dr. Shashi Tharoor. One of his books is Elephant, Cell Phone, and the Tiger. And he does paint a picture of India pre and post liberalization. I'll be very interested if you could paint your picture and also the picture of your company, how it evolved pre and post liberalization.
Thank you, Utkarsh. I will give you an example. I did write about this in my book, the pre-liberalization India. And you typically had to wait for seeing the director or the undersecretary in Government of India to get most of your paperwork done, which is called the licenses that were being provided by them. And while you waited outside, there used to be two chairs. And one chair used to be with only 3 legs. So it probably got its balance by pushing itself against the wall. So in the 4-leg chair, the peon used to sit down. And in the 3-leg chair, the visitor used to sit down. And then you had this other very challenging situation, because the peon, given there's nothing bad about it, but given what his earning profile was, used to smoke this thing called the BD, which is a tendu leaf wrapped up. It's nauseating. And you have to inhale that smoke and wait for the big babuji to call you. That used to be the pre-liberalization time. I think post-liberalization, there's so much amount of change that has come by. There are instances that we have, for instance, the scheme called STPI, Software Technology Parks of India, which is a post-liberalization scheme that came in order to promote more amount of exports. There's an unwritten rule between the director of STPI and the local association president that any paper that goes to him or her gets returned within 24 hours. Even if they're traveling, they give what is called as verbal orders to their staff, and they come and sign up the document. That's the amount of transformation that we've seen. From waiting for hours to no end to a situation where you literally had instantaneous results coming in. I think the long way to go. There's still post-liberalization. We're about 25, 27 years into it. We think a lot more can still happen. But the good news is it's progressing in the right direction.
Got it. And your company from 1991, say 10 years after that, how did you survive? How did you find the product market fit?
As I said earlier, Utkarsh, that we found digitization as services, which were low-hanging fruit. And these were services which were in great demand. Because what was happening was, if you look at around early part of 90s, the Western world were all committed to using computers for their design. That's CAD/CAM, computer design, computer manufacturing, computer engineering, CAD/CAM CAE as it's called. But then they also had a large backlog of all their documentation, which is all paper-based. And that had to become digital too. So we now think about a digital revolution sweeping all around the world. But you look at even 1990s, the utility companies in those era, which is basically large telephone companies, large power companies, water, sewer, wastewater, all these companies which had network of information with them, which are all in the form of drawings, which are all paper drawings, they all had to come into the computer systems. Just not come into the computer system, they had to be intelligent too. Because if you just scan the document and you put it into computer, it's not intelligent. You can't go ahead and edit the document when you scan it, right? It's all one image. So therefore, if you scan, the scanning technologies were available. But then if you scan the drawing and put it into the computer system, you would not get it intelligent, because you had to know what's the length of the cable, where is the conduit, where is the pillar, where's the curve, where's the how far is the conduit from the curve of the road, and so on and so forth. So all these definitely required a sizable amount of human intervention. Technologies have changed at this point of time. We'll come to that a little while later. So as a result of that, there was enormous amount of human intervention required in making these drawings intelligent. And that's where we saw a labor arbitrage and a cost arbitrage that was there. And we decided to, and that was basically using computers. It was CAD software that was used, computer design software. It was the same for visualization too. So therefore, the first 9 years, our life was good because we found a marketplace, but it's also tough because it requires enormous amount of human skills. So these human skills for digitization, if you look at it, were not available in India. So A, it meant a sizable amount of training. B, then you, even in spite of training, you need to have quality consistency. Over and again, you're not looking at 5 people, 10 people. Our digitization business itself at one point of time had 3,000 people. So you had to, irrespective of who did the digitization of a drawing, it had to be the same quality at the end of it, which to the customer meant we used to have SLAs, as they call service level agreements, which are, they can't be more than 2% errors in the drawing. So therefore, that was a very challenging, daunting task. I write about it and the amount of effort that I put in terms of bringing processes in place. What helped us is in terms of laying out the processes. And once we laid out the processes and made sure that people were trained, we were scaling like crazy. Actually, the customers were very perplexed and surprised. Our SLAs said 98% accuracy, whereas our deliverables were more at about 99.5, 99.8. Hardly there was one mistake and 100 elements that you can see. So the messaging I have for my young entrepreneurial friends is that every entrepreneurial journey has a lot of challenges, like what I faced. In this particular instance, I'll just give this as an example. But you could also search for a solution. And you have to definitely have that curious mind to find a solution which is very unique and which is very robust, which can allow you to scale.
I can only imagine that around early 90s, finding tech talent to be able to do this kind of work would not have been easy. How were you finding this human capital, and what was this training infrastructure that you put in place?
So interesting question, Utkarsh. Primarily what we thought was the fresh graduate engineers could be a good talent pool to get trained in the digitization techniques. They have to have a understanding of what, because these were not drawings, these were maps. So that you have to have a good understanding of mapping technologies. Because one of the very basic things that we learned, I also referred to it in my book somewhere, is that a world is not flat. World is round. So therefore, if you take large maps, there's something called projection system, because on paper, it's all flat. So when it comes back on your computer screen, it's flat, it's not round. So therefore, the ability to say that, when it becomes round, the distance is far different from what's being seen in the screen. That is the projection system that goes on. So we had to train them on the domain, that's now digitization. The second one is they had to get trained in the software, because at that point of time, there were not many software houses which had training. So we had to have two things. One is the ability to functionally train them. The second one is in terms of getting them training on the software itself. But more importantly, I think the key thing I always learned, and I keep saying this, I always choose people who had the ability to learn, because we live in a world, there's a constant change. So therefore, you have to just not say that I'll train these people, but I also select people who have ability to learn constantly are the people who will build my organization.
That is fantastic. And I think that never changes. The learnability is as important in the early 90s as it is today. Absolutely. Technology has changed, but that particular skill is even more relevant as we speak now. So now you're in 2000s, you have found product market fit. How do you decide to scale your services? How do you decide what to do and what not to do as a software company?
Well, we were very fortunate to find a customer who still continues to be a customer for the last 20 plus years. I can name them. It was Pratt & Whitney. It was accidentally that we ran into each other, but it turned out to be a very long-lasting, large relationship.
Could you tell us about the accident? We love serendipity on that.
Accident, very interesting. I didn't mention about it in my book too. Is that I get a call from an old friend of mine who was working for Pratt & Whitney, who was doing some machining work for them, very small outfit in Hyderabad. And he said, look, these guys from Pratt & Whitney are coming into Hyderabad and they're hosting a dinner tonight. I got an invite, come with me, let's go for dinner together. So I told my friend saying that, look, one of the cardinal principles of my life is just don't do gate crashing, don't go uninvited. And he was quite nice to say, no, don't worry about that part. Those days we did not even have email. It used to be faxes. He said, give me a fax number and I'll make sure the country manager of Pratt & Whitney will send you a fax inviting you for dinner tonight. So it was late in the evening. I had an early morning flight to catch to go to Mumbai for a NASSCOM annual flagship event called the NILF those days. And so very reluctantly, I said, let's go and see what it is. It was not very well illuminated place. And those days also, there were not many flights that used to come from Delhi to Hyderabad. This particular delegation was flying in that evening from there. And they said the flight was late. It was 8:30. When we first saw it, the first few people walking in from the team, they said the team was as many as 15 people strong. One thing that I learned very early in my sales life is also to say that when you see a large group of people, you need to certainly identify who is the coffee maker and who is the decision maker. So it wasn't an easy task. I found the decision maker. It was, I think I mentioned his name, called a gentleman called Ed Crowe. He was a senior vice president of engineering of Pratt & Whitney. He was subsequently, I came to realize that he was God's sent gift to mankind in terms of building aircraft engines. That is the type of knowledge Ed Crowe had. And Ed Crowe and I started a conversation about Indian wines. Indian wines were not so popular those days. There used to be a local Hyderabadi wine called the Golconda Red Ruby. And he said, what are you drinking? I said, the only thing that I drink is wine. So he said, what do you think of Indian wines? I said, a lot of my friends keep making jokes about me, saying that I drink chemical. That's what the wine was like. So he said, no, I'm going to try it. But I said, you should have that special taste to drink Indian wine. He liked it. And the conversation went on for an hour, all about India. He was very curious about learning about India, what type of technology skills we had in India. and what type of things we could do for a company like Pratt & Whitney. At the end of the conversation, he said, Mohan, I'd like to come and see you tomorrow. So that accidental it was. And then he said, I'll give you an hour. I'll come to your facility. I did not have, this is early 2000 we are talking about, any major engineering contracts. I had only one small contract with me from Ford Motor Company. And they came in a team of 15 people. In a few months before that, I inaugurated a fairly large facility of mine. It was brand new, but most of it was empty. He came in, and then we demonstrated to him what we did for this digitization as such. And what I think subsequently, I had several conversations. It turned out to be from being a professional associate to a good friend. That's the translation we have seen in him. What made him decide that day that I was the right partner for him? And he said, Mohan, I believe in terms of trusted relationships, and I saw the trust in you. So whatever you told us previous night, you demonstrated on the shop floor. We said, we measured to manage. We had quality systems. We displayed the productivity of people, all that were there. He said that was the start point for the relationship. So therefore, that's the accidental meeting that I had with Ed Crowe and his team of 15 people from Pratt & Whitney. At the end of that meeting that they had next morning, they said, when are you coming to Hartford? That they're headquartered out of Hartford in Connecticut in US. And I said, tell me the date, I'll come by. If you want, I'll come to become a part of your baggage. I can come with you. So they gave me time, 2 weeks from there. Thereafter, it was history. Slowly but steadily, we climbed up the ladder with them. The best of times, we had about 1,000+ people on a single engagement. This is very high-end design work for aircraft engines. So accidental meetings can also be very turning points in the life of a company. And this was one.
In my significantly smaller and much less adventurous life, I cannot echo that. Almost everything meaningful in my life is a happy accident. It's just that you got to keep looking for happy accidents.
Exactly. And accidents also come to Utkarsh for a prepared mind, is what I keep saying.
Right.
See, I'm sure you say accident, but you constantly look for opportunities. And that's when they smile at you. And that's what happened in our case too. We never gave up that engineering services is a very difficult one. We persisted. Actually, in 1997, I did an IPO for the company. 1991 is when I incorporated the company. 97, a little too early in the life, but I did an IPO. And in the IPO, I made a commitment that with rejuvenation, this engineering services market, we needed some more money. That's why we went to the IPO. We wanted to buy large CAD/CAM systems and so on and so forth. And as a result of that, I think we lived up to that promise that we made to our investors too.
Right. So IPO's done. Your clients are growing. Clients are staying with you as well. And then there are many macro challenges that start happening. Every 10 years there is something. And anyone who's from the IIT services or technology space knows what happened in the late 90s, early 2000s. How did you sort of navigate your company through that series of crises around that time?
So, good question, Utkarsh. Thank you. The first one that I would like to highlight is that I'm a first-generation entrepreneur. I don't have deep pockets. Come from a middle-class background. My father was a police officer. To them, next to God was education. So that's what he gave us. So therefore, what did we do? And then, our ambitions were large. We wanted to become a global software services company. With that ambition, we said, look, we can't go and spend our money in creating offices all around the world. So the first model that we did was a partnership model. So therefore, we had partners in geographies who did the sales and marketing for us. And also they had the client relationships. I did the back end for them. That's what it was. So by late 90s, we realized this is not a model that will work in terms of scaling, because objectives could be far different. I was ambitious. my partners were not equally ambitious. They were trying to think about this as a lifestyle business in one particular case in Europe. That's what we found. So therefore, what we did, the stumbling block was the growth will not come in this particular model. We had to take that aggressive position. So we wanted to have a geographic expansion. And what we did was, at the size of the company that we were, we decided to go on the acquisition path. So we went and bought a company in London. We bought a company in Germany, Stuttgart to be more precise. And thereafter, we bought a company in Washington, D.C. It's just across the state line into Virginia. And it was Virginia. And as a result of that, you had geographical expansion that we did. So this was the first stumbling block. Partnership does not work. You should be in a position to do that. Or we started realizing that, look, if you want to get into very serious engineering as a service, the other big block is a domain expertise. Domain becomes very important. You can't do training with domain. It's sheer experience. So the curious mind said, where do you find these domain experts in India? And especially this was in a very sophisticated technology like aircraft engine or aircraft fuselage design work. And we said, look, there are these public sector large corporations, the HALs, the GTREs, and a few more. So we went ahead and said, look, we'll provide a better career for them. And people bought our story. It's not very easy. So that was a stumbling block again. Or if you look at even the late 2000s, 2008, I believe that's when the financial meltdown happened. We were, by the time we said it's not just aerospace, we had rail equipment business with us. We had nuclear power plants. The fourth expansion, we said, electronics is going to be the future. And we saw the semicon way back in 2008. So we bought a semiconductor design company, VLSI design company out of San Francisco. The day we were, I signed the documentation, but still did not go to the seller. We realized that there was this major crisis in the world. The meltdown was on. Should we go back? And my point was, no, I think we can still make good of what the challenges we have with us. So to us, if you look at, to me personally, entrepreneurial life is all about facing challenges day in and day out. Sure, I use this word called roller coaster ride every morning. And what is this roller coaster ride? Is to me, there's a certain amount of fear, but there's also excitement every morning, saying that there's going to be a new day that's there. And you also know that there is a certain amount of safety nets that you have built because of your capability, of your planning, and so on and so forth. And what keeps you going is at the end of the day, you certainly see pleasure and also a peace of mind. So therefore, a combination of these, the uncertainty in terms of future, the excitement that goes on, the risks that are there, and so on and so forth, makes your life complete. So therefore, from time to time, every time that we continuously evaluate what the risks are, what challenges that we have, and find a mitigation strategy associated with it. So that's how we have constantly fought the battles.
Yeah, and won them multiple times. I love this quote about entrepreneurship. I think it comes from Brian Armstrong. It's that entrepreneurship is going from setback to setback with enthusiasm.
Sure. Setbacks with enthusiasm. Right. Okay.
Yeah. So there are many important milestones, in a company's lifestyle. You got to that IPO mark fairly quickly. And then you also eventually became like $1 billion company. I mean, that is the platinum standard for most companies. But you were a profitable $1 billion company with very strong unit economics processes in place. When you contrast that to other kinds of $1 billion companies that have become more popular today, what is the fundamental difference between your approach and perhaps the approach that you read about these days?
Well, I think both evolved in different time periods. So that one has to definitely keep in mind. I belong to a generation of companies which profitability became very important. It's not how much of market share that you get. But whereas in evolving and emerging technologies, it is not existing markets that are there, but you start more amount of market development. You start creating the market. So therefore, you need to spend a lot more money compared to what you do in a market which is already, the total addressable market is defined. So the result is these are two different types of businesses in my perspective. The current breed of young startups, which actually do not care about how much money you're losing, but you're only trying to say how your valuations are going up. And valuations would go up basically based on how many customers you have and so on and so forth. So therefore, we can't compare both of them. But I still tell my startups at this point of time, I do have my basket is about 20 to 25 startups that I have with me. I spend a considerable amount of my time these days on the startups. I created T-Hub, which is the largest incubation center in the country.
In Hyderabad, yeah.
The point I tell them is, to me, even in the current scenario, you should definitely clearly lay a path when you will be profitable. You tell me you won't be profitable for 3 years, 5 years is perfectly fine. But at the end of period, the 3 or 5 years, you should become profitable. You should at least become break even, if not profitable. So it's a question of the hype. I'm sure things are changing at this point of time. But the reality of life is business is all about making sure that you have a sustainability. And sustainability is not by valuation. Sustainability is because of how much money you make out of your business. That's my belief.
So it's an important reminder for all of us, to keep the fundamentals in mind, while also, leverage the new trends, look at, the way technology is evolving. I want to get your opinion as a business leader, as an academic, as an investor, institution builder, about trying to understand India's growth story with what you're trying to build, understand macro trends. Because when I read the book and when I speak to you, it very clearly occurs to me that you understand India and you understand your competitive strength and you understand, what's your main thing and what's something that the company also does. So any thoughts about how did you stick to focus for decades in order to, get to the level you are? And were there times when you were not sure what your focus should be, when new kinds of companies were coming up in the similar domain? And what your thoughts on this entire picture would be pretty helpful.
Sure. So I thought there were a couple of questions that you put together, Utkarsh. One is about India is one you said. How was the opportunity fanning out? And how did I stick to the domains that I choose to work in? I think we'll answer the second question first, and I'll go back to the first question thereafter. The first one is that, to me, focus brings success. As much as I think we talked earlier, that you also said the same thing, that prepared minds, luck would always come and favor them. So therefore, we said we will not definitely move away from focus. If you probably have a setback, you can always think in terms of what are alternatives that I have. No, we said, no, let's understand why do we have this setback? And we need to go back to fix it. Why is the quality so poor? Why are we not getting consistency in terms of quality? We went back to the drawing boards and understood saying that, no, unless you have consistency in terms of capability of individuals, you never get quality consistently coming out. So similar to the case that you said, domain expertise, and I talk about one more example of trying to understand the focus. We moved into rail engineering. Rail is a big practice for us. And we used to work for a British company. And we found one of our senior marketing guys was there at the FSCP and found very, very old people working in that office. There's nothing wrong about it. I'm an old man too. But we try to understand why only the old people are working. Why not the youngsters? Because they said, there was something called IRC licensing that was required. And that meant, there's a fairly large amount of time that was needed to get those licenses. We found ways by which that licenses can be obtained. So it's a combination of number of things. So therefore, what was it? Focus. Rail is a practice that we'll be in. Aerospace, people said, is a tough one, but we made sure that we address the aerospace business. So focus is what brought us the success at this point of time, irrespective of the challenges that we faced. You come back to India. India is a different ballgame now compared to what it was in the past. I think the recent past, especially if you see the government of India's number of initiatives in terms of Atmanirbhar Bharat, makes India a promising land. Why didn't it happen so far? I think R&D investments were very few in India. If at all,
Right.
if you look at industries which did reasonable amount of R&D, one is pharmaceuticals. They spent a lot of money. I think the best of pharmaceutical companies are there in India. I think to a certain extent, we also did some work in automobiles, auto especially parts. Or third one is biotechnology. Other than that, I think we depended enormously on import of products. Especially if you look at aerospace and defense, it is all to do with imports and imports. But I think we are seeing the change occurring at this point of time. People are, given some of the geopolitics that are there, they're also looking inward. I think globalization will probably morph itself into some amount of self-reliance. In addition to being global, you have to be self-reliant too. So the Indian opportunities will also be plenty as we move forward. The future looks different from what the past was. Past India for engineering design work was very, very limited. Whereas now, if possibilities arise, but I think you also need to be very careful in terms of trying to see how best you can address this market. So therefore, focus is one thing which brought us success over a period of time. And the second one that we had is that India market will evolve much more as a company, as a government, the country embarks on this Atmanirbhar Bharat, and also as the Amrit Kal comes in.
That's fantastic. Amen to that. Mohan, can you tell me about some of the most promising employees or young professionals that have come your way in the past decades? More than their names, I'm interested in their attitudes. One, early on, you mentioned the ability to learn new things. But in every company's journey, there are employees that play, leadership roles or really rise up to the occasion. We want to understand what makes such employees.
See, you've got to create the environment, the ecosystem to make them feel much more comfortable. I kept talking about it and continue to talk about this ownership mindset that has to come into people if organizations has to be sustainable for long periods of time. And I think I wrote in my book itself, the first example that I had, I actually started off as a management trainee way back in 1974. I'm fairly sure Utkarsh would not have been born at that point of time. That's where I started my professional career. And I used to run a diesel engine assembly shop for them. And what was, there used to be several challenges. If you read the book, you'll understand the story. But key thing is, I said, look, irrespective of whether I do the job or not, I'll get my salary all right. But more importantly, the satisfaction will never come saying that, I established something of my own. So therefore, though I used to work for Lala Charatramji, who was the chairman of the board of DCM those days, for good reasons, I used to be in touch with him too. And he gave us enough of liberty. And we decided that is like our shop. It is, I owned the shop. I made a commitment to Lalaji that I'll produce 25 diesel engines per shift, 75 in a day, 450 in a week. I said, that's a commitment I made. That particular mindset has to come into every employee too, saying that he's not being there as a paid salaried employee. One way we have done that, I think, reasonably well is to make sure that we also shared the wealth with the wealth creators. So we were one of the first few companies we had what is called as an associate stock option plan. And certainly, I think employment is just beyond just work. making sure that there are many other facets that will come by is what makes, I think, a big difference in terms of employee involvement, in terms of building sustainable companies. So what we try to do over a period of time, we create an ecosystem where people think that they own the place, they're responsible. They also make them ambitious and govern them in making sure that you don't have any political environment. There is only one methodology by which people get recognized. And that one particular thing is performance and performance and performance. I keep telling people, don't come and tell me any reason, say, why I did A, B, C, D. Tell me your performance. This is last year. This is this year. You can come and thump on my table. I don't need to do that. And I will reward you thereafter. So therefore, you have to create that culture which says that, ownership mindset, performance is the ethic in this organization. There's no politics that go around. That's when companies sustain.
Understood. Somebody once told me that success in life comes down to the number of difficult conversations one is willing to have. You have such a calm demeanor and you look like, touchwood, a very happy person. Hope that's always the case. How and when have you had difficult conversations that just couldn't be avoided?
In entrepreneurial life, you can't say time is all the time on your side. You have difficult conversations. Difficult conversations and customers constantly telling you that you can improve your quality of your products. You can bring in more amount of innovation into the relationship, or you have to bring down your prices. And one of the things which we found very interesting was also that customers would define a project for you and you start executing it. That's when they start saying, no, I needed something more, which in the software terminology, it's called the scope creep. But customer would never admit that scope creep. He would say, look, I meant this already in what I told you or what I wrote to you. So these are difficult conversations. And so one of the principles I used to teach my salespeople is that break the bad news first. Tell the guy that this involves A, B, C, D further. And this is what will probably cost him. Don't go back to him and then say, because of this, I'm increasing your price. There's no denying that. I think scope creep gives us 2% to 2.5% of our revenues on a year-to-year basis. So there are difficult conversations with the customers. There are difficult conversations with your employees. Having said all that, I think the employees think they have to be paid the best. But you need to make sure that the company is also viable. You can't be the best paying employee in the world. You probably are good enough if you're in the top quartile, is what I keep benchmarking myself. You also have difficult conversations with your investors. They are constantly looking for better returns than what you do. But you have to balance them off, trying to say that, look, I'm not here just to service one particular stakeholder who made me successful, but I have to be equitable to all the stakeholders. That's when you start become successful. People can hear the other views and make sure that the customer would continue to pay you better and better. And so long as there's automation coming in, we're giving productivity gains. There are SLAs which say that you get 10% gain because of productivity, but because of inflation, you get this 5% or 7% increase every 3 years. So it has to be a combination of both of them. So I think the key to all this would lie in one thing called communication. That's another key thing that we felt. What are we doing right now? Communicate, communicate, and communicate. And so long as you can keep those channels open, and not that you just all the time speak, but you also listen to people. I think that is what makes the company different. That's what will make companies sustainable.
At this stage of your career, you're heavily involved in institution building, be it NASSCOM, be it, the Institutes of Technology. What's the broader purpose? How are you seeing this theory of change pan out? What I'm really trying to get at is, if you could make a few changes as an influential leader in the education space, what would that be? And again, as a leader of an institutional body or industry body, what are some changes that you're working towards?
Well, I think, again, a good question, Utkarsh. I've worked on several things so far. One, I think I feel very proud in that perceptible change that brought to this nation itself is on 2000, in 2018, the Government of India, Ministry of Education created a committee under my chairmanship, primarily asking us to develop the perspective plan for technical education for this nation. And I won't get to dwell into the report and so on and so forth. One highlight, I'll just bring it out, is that till such time, there was no focus on digital education. The emerging technologies were not a part of curriculum in any of these engineering colleges which came under Ministry of Education. They might have been, IITs were one aspect of life, but it's much beyond IITs. AICT controlled the several thousand engineering colleges. And that's when we called out 9 different technologies which are emerging, 9 technologies in which they have to start. And today, if you see that, I think every engineering college, these are thousands now, do have ability to skill people in these areas. So you brought about a perceptible change. Or the second thing that I also worked very hard and I continue to work on it, we did an event even last week, was that we have to bridge the gap between academia and the industry. What the industry requires, academy is not producing. And industry is not probably are explicitly stating what their requirements are. So therefore, the connect has to improve. And the big event that we did last week was bringing all the 23 IITs together under one roof and doing what is called as an IIT R&D fair. It was branded as Inventive. And I think that certainly brought an enormous amount of traction to the industry to say, oh my God, we didn't realize that the IITs did so much of R&D work. So the game plan at this point of time, or a third one that I'll also talk about as a part of the second one itself, is that I was a part of the committee which also institutionalized something called professors of practice. To be a teacher, you had to have a PhD as a qualification. Experience did not count. But in the recent past, we put this framework in place that people with experience also can be appointed as faculty members. So these are the changes which will have a very long-term implications. I should give a lot of credit to the government and Dr. Kasturi Rangan, who brought in a new education policy in 2020. It's called NEP 2020. I'm working very closely with, again, the government in terms of trying to see how best it can be executed. And one is to write a policy, but the other one is to execute it. So it is a very forward-looking policy, but I think the key would lie in making sure that we can flawlessly execute it. And some of the elements of that is what is in play currently.
Fantastic. And just like towards the close of the interview, I want to ask you about some of the major influences in your life, mentors, friends, partners, who've just shaped your outlook towards your life, and what might be your message to them and to the younger people like myself listening in to this discussion.
Sure. I have several people in my mind, even starting off with Lala Charitramji himself. He was probably in his late 50s, early 60s when I was in my early 20s as a management trainee with him. But the amount of curiosity he used to have in mind, and he was not a technical person, but the way in which he would understand technology. So that motivated me to say, nothing is beyond you if you want to learn. So there could be a number of negative things I talk about, his leadership styles in my book. But those are the ones which you don't learn to say I implement them, but you learn to say I avoid them. Or leadership to me was also leading by example. I had a boss called Vinod Krishna in Microbosch. 7:45 was our time when you get to work. And I never saw Vinod Krishna coming to work at 7:46. It had to be 7:45. So you can't challenge him on, because I think good leaders are also disciplined people. They follow set rails. They can't come at work as they like and as they please themselves. So therefore, what I think is important thereafter is that you come across a number of people in your life. The qualities you like in them, you certainly like to practice them. You don't need to be them, If you are them, then you lose your identity. You have to be yourself. You should be authentic to yourself. But certainly you can borrow the good principles of life and implement them. That's when you become an outstanding leader.
Such a memorable lesson to part on. I'll send you this essay I wrote for Harvard Business Review about envy, and I'd love to get your thoughts on it. Because often when we think about mentors and leaders, we try to mimic them, but that's not the point. The point is to adapt what you've learned and contextualize it to your point. So I'll email it to you.
Sure.
But I just want to say what a delight it was to to have this discussion with you, to read your book. And I know this would be the first of many conversations that we'll have with you on Network Capital.
Thank you, Utkarsh. I appreciate Network Capital taking this initiative of trying to get me on this podcast. I've heard some of yours. You do an outstanding job. Congratulations at that count. We'll keep in touch with you. And the message to our listeners at this point of time, read this book, Engineered in India. I think there are some very good lessons for entrepreneurs. The whole intent of writing the book is motivating the youngsters to become entrepreneurs. And I'm sure they'll enjoy reading it.